Started.
Divya, hi, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and now I should have video or I don't have video?
Sir, you don't have a video right now.
Why is that? I am trying to think. Why don't I have video? Hmm, that is odd. Why don't I have meeting? Hang on.
So you can just press Alt V.
You're saying I should press Alt V.
Yes, so just try that.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Now.
Yes, now we can see you.
Interesting. I can't see myself, but I think that's not important. I can see all of you. So I can see at least Nitesh and I can see Divya, so that's cool.
Right, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our chief guest, Mr. Sameer Chadha, sir. He's the CEO and partner to KPMG Global Services. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation. It gives us immense pleasure to learn from such an outstanding leader from one of the top companies, KPMG. But before I give the floor to him, few words about him. He's a chartered accountant and a graduate of Sri Ram College of Commerce, a seasoned business leader with 30 years of experience in strategic leadership roles, both to third party service providers and to offshoring captives of major MNCs, some of them being Lehman Brothers and Barclays. At KPMG Global Services, he is responsible for the overall management of and accountability of the platform. He has a vision for the platform to be a strategic asset for the member firms globally and delivering superior value to them and helping their clients succeed. Prior to the KPMG Global Services, he has spent 8 years with Barclays Shared Services, initially as CEO, then CEO. In his tenure, firms grew rapidly. For example, from 700 staff in one city to 10,000 staff in three cities, covering the entire range of banking services. And prior to Barclays, he joined businesses at initial stage of operations responsible for growing them. He has held various senior positions also before joining Barclays, some of them being Senior VP at Lehman Brothers, VP at First Source Solutions, and he had been at Bank of America for 8 years across number of roles, the last being Head of Consumer Banking Operations. He began with his career with a 3 year stint at Nestle before joining into services space. Sir, the General Management Batch of XLRI is very pleased to welcome you and is looking forward to this learning session with you. Thank you so much, sir, and this floor is yours now.
Thanks, Divya, so much. Appreciate you, all you've done to get this going. Thank you for that introduction. I have to say, whenever somebody says I've worked for 30 years, I feel really, really ancient, right? Especially when I'm talking to a batch like this, right? It's always a stark reminder of how old you are. And what I like the best about these talks is that your write-up will sound and make you sound so much more fancier than you actually are when you look back on your 30 years. That's not the way you actually think of yourself, but all these write-ups make you actually feel really good about yourself. So thanks, Divya, and hello to the entire batch. I'm really actually delighted to be here. The way I'll do this is that I think, Divya, we have about 90 minutes on the calendar, right?
Yes, sir.
So I'll speak for about an hour and 20 minutes, and then we can take questions. I'm kidding, in case you think I'm not going to speak an hour and 20 minutes. I'm only going to speak for about maybe about 20-30 minutes. I've got some prepared slides, 2 or 3 of them, and and then this is a big group. I think some 80 odd people. So I think it'll be good to kind of get some Q&A going. And you know what, when you see these slides, right? And I don't know, Divya, have you pre-circulated them or they'll be seeing them for the first time?
So they'll be seeing them for the first time.
Okay, so when you see the slides, they're all very simple things, right? No real big jargon heavy, stuff, etc. And, my experience in 30 years is that, frankly speaking, it's the simple things in corporate careers that actually make a difference. It's the simple things that actually you end up forgetting as you're progressing in your career. I mean, this is not to say that, technical competence and domain expertise is not important. Of course it is. But I think all of you, from what I understand, are, have a certain amount of work experience behind you and, doing an executive MBA. So I think hopefully these lessons resonate with you, and hopefully these are some of the lessons that you can actually remember as you're progressing through your career. So Divya, with that, if you can just put on the first slide. The hello is over. So, okay, next one, please. Okay, so the first one is something I think that's really important, is that you have to be patient to build a career. Okay, I have just a bit about myself. Divya spoke about my let's say my corporate career, but on a personal level, I'm married. I have two sons. One is 23. He's doing a job. The other is 18. He's just going to go to college this year, right? And this is one thing I feel, that when I see nowadays attention spans are so small, everything is on a here and now basis. You want everything, at the click of a button. You want everything to happen instantaneously. You can go online, you can order whatever you want, it'll be with you in the next 48 hours. But I think, remember one thing, that careers take time to build. There is really no shortcut to success. And I think oftentimes when people say that, so and so has been an overnight success, it takes many years to become an overnight success, right? I think we are geared only to see the tip of the iceberg, which is somebody's outcome and where they sit in life after a certain journey, right? But the journey before that, because it's not so glamorous, nobody really talks about that, but it takes a long time to build a career. Okay. If you, I always say that it takes typically about 12 years to do your, initial education. You can't really accelerate that beyond a point in time. It will take that time. So you're all in the midst of running a career. Please appreciate that a couple of years here and there in a career doesn't make a difference. I worked 30 years. I first became the CEO of Barclays in 2010 July, right? And honestly speaking, even if that had happened a year or two later, okay, I wouldn't really have minded, because in my mind, I kind of thought I was progressing down that path. I thought at one point I will actually become that role. It actually, truth be told, it probably happened a little earlier than I thought it would, because I was reporting to somebody who was an expat, and he left the country, and I earlier than was scheduled, and I ended up taking up the job. But if in the midst of a career, you are all a batch of 80 people, right? You'll all have different trajectories. You've had different trajectories to get here. You'll have different trajectories when you go from here. When a batchmate of yours suddenly goes ahead, and you then start feeling bad, saying, I wish I could have gone ahead. I think I should have gone ahead. I think I'm as competent, or maybe I'm better, etc., etc. Those things feel very bad when you're in the moment. But when you look back, like I said, I've worked 30 years. I probably have another, I don't know, maybe 6, 8, 10 years left. I don't know how long I have left in my career. But the point is, when you look back, it doesn't really feel that important. But when you're in the moment, I do appreciate it feels quite, something. But please be patient. I strongly believe that talent always finds a way. Talent will always come through. Just give yourself the time to actually get to where you have to. Put your head down, work hard. Hopefully the rest normally should take care of itself. Okay. The next thing is that focus on what you can control, right? In the current COVID environment, especially what's happened since 2020 onwards, right? There's a lot of anxiety about, jobs and the market, and, what will happen to us, what will happen to our careers, et cetera, et cetera. But my sense in life has always been, my motto has always been that you can actually only control two things in life. You can control your performance, and you can control your attitude, right? So try and focus on them, and try not to get caught up in what is called free-floating anxiety. Because when you get caught up in free-floating anxiety, frankly, you get paralyzed. You're unable to almost take any action, right? So therefore, I feel focus on what you can control in life. We are human beings. It's very difficult not to get distracted by what is, happening around us. But especially, I think what happened in 2020, it's really difficult to, not feel that anxiety. But ultimately, remember that you can only control what you can. try not to waste energy on things which you can't really control the outcome of. So, what will be the outcome of Brexit on the offshoring industry that I'm a part of? What will the new Biden administration's views be on the offshoring industry, etc.? How will that impact us? Sure, you have to try and stay abreast of what the thinking is. But beyond a point in time, if you keep thinking about that, it's not that we can sit and actually control the outcome of that, right? So that's the basic message that you should try and imbibe. Then the other thing is that have a positive attitude. This Charlie Brown cartoon is one of my very favorites. Okay, and in which Charlie is saying someday we will all die, right? And Snoopy is saying true, but on all the other days we will not. And I think this is a great optimist pessimist point of view, right? It's articulated so beautifully in just whatever it is, 20 words or something like that. A positive attitude always will endear you, and whether it's on the personal side or whether it's on the corporate side, everybody looks for people who have a good positive attitude. Even when the going is tough and the chips are down, you can still maintain a positive attitude and have a spring in your step rather than always be negative, always be looking at things and why they can't work rather than why something can work. Okay, so please remember that positive attitudes are exceptionally important and that nothing lasts forever. And there are two elements of this. I think if you look at 2020, it's been a remarkable year where I think, so KPMG, the company I run, KPMG Global Services, we've been working from home since about mid-March. That means we are about to complete about 1 year of working from home. Okay, now the point is that there's been so much anxiety and there is so much concern about COVID. It's still ongoing, etc. But at the end of the tunnel, a vaccine has come out. Okay, and now people are getting vaccinated, and hopefully, the variants don't morph in a way that the vaccines can't kind of work, etc., etc. Right now, there is a feeling of hope that the vaccines have come and the worst is probably behind us. All of you follow the news. India's cases in India are on a steadily declining curve now since September. And they're much lower than what they used to be even over 3 or 4 months ago. So the bad times don't last. And please understand this. I know so many people, on LinkedIn reach out to me for jobs. I know friends, I know family who've lost roles, etc. And I think somewhere you have to keep the hope that the bad times don't last forever. There is always light at the end of the tunnel. You have to retain that optimism and that positivity. And on the flip side, when the good times also don't last forever. So when you're successful in anything, whatever it may be on your personal life or in your professional life, there is a couple of things, points in the slides ahead. The biggest thing I feel that a leader can do is stay grounded and stay humble, right? So it's really important to enjoy success when it happens. Absolutely, feel great about it for a certain period of time, but never let it get to your head. Success make you arrogant, stay grounded, because ultimately speaking, these are all passing phases in life. It's there today, it's gone tomorrow. You never know. I've always felt that when you leave an organization, people should actually value you for the individual you were, not necessarily the role you held. Okay. In my role as the CEO of a company, obviously people show me their best side, etc., etc. But I would much rather that they feel I'm a nice person rather than try and think of the fact that, this is the CEO of a company and remember me in the context of a personal view rather than the title view. Yeah. Okay. Let's go. The good thing about, these virtual sessions, I have to confess, is that, obviously now one can do, I do so many of these sessions sitting inside my home and, you can reach out to so many more people, but I have to say that it's really difficult to figure out audience reaction, right? You have no idea what people are thinking. There's no idea of body language. And when you're in front of people, that's all very clear, but never mind. I'm hoping so far so good. Okay. The next two are actually link points, right? I heard this so I read a lot, right? And certain things stick with me. And oftentimes the things that stick with me or stick with us is the simple things, complex things explained in simple words. Okay. So this whole thing about do the hard right, don't do the easy wrong. Many times in life, we are confronted with situations where we end up taking the easier path because that's the path of low resistance and you don't do the hard thing. And I'll give you an example. If, let's say, two of you are working in an organization and you see one of you do something wrong, something which is against the values of the company, something which is an integrity breach, something which shouldn't be done, and that person is a friend of yours, will you actually report that incident or will you just say he's a friend of mine and I'm not going to report this incident, right? The right thing to do is to actually report it but the easier thing is not to report it because that individual is a friend of yours. Okay. The other example is that as a manager, if you have to take a hard call as a manager on performance grounds, somebody is not performing well, are you able to take the same decision for people who are close to you versus people who are not close to you? It's very simple to take decisions with people who are not really that close to you, because then it becomes quite abstract and it becomes something that you can do fairly simply. But if somebody is close to you, you know that somebody really well, are you still able to take that hard call and have that hard conversation? Okay. And so many times in my career, I've come across, a crossroads where you have to take a tough decision from a corporate point of view, right? But, I've always tried to be guided by this, that try and do the hard right. Don't try and take the easy path. In your personal life, you can do what you want. Nobody can really dictate beyond a point in time your personal life. But in corporate life, personally, I'm the kind of individual who doesn't like confrontation. So I don't like getting into confrontations on a personal front, right? But in a corporate role, you actually cannot shy away from it. So in a corporate role, if you're seeing bad behavior, if you're seeing performance which is not good, if you're seeing things which are wrong, you cannot actually turn a blind eye to it. You have to address it. Okay. And I think that's the point on the top, is have a strong moral compass, right? Integrity is everything in life. And, we all know in our hearts what is the right thing and what is the wrong thing. It doesn't need to be, this is what we've grown up with, this is what we've been taught, these are the values our parents have given us, these are the values our teachers and our education has given us. You know what is right and you know what is wrong, right? So always try and have a strong moral compass, try and take decisions on the basis of this, do the hard right, don't do the easy wrong. Okay. Then the next 2 points, actually the next 3 points, I'll kind of narrate a couple of stories to make it more engaging, right? So no one is successful by themselves. I don't know how many of you have heard of a story called Who's Packed Your Parachute? And if you heard it, you're going to hear it again. So, but if you haven't heard it, here goes, right? So the story is that there is it's a true story. There is a US Navy pilot, and he's fighting in Vietnam, and his plane gets shot down, and he's imprisoned. He becomes a prisoner of war, gets released after a certain number of years, gets back into the US, sitting in a cafe in a coffee shop, and he's actually, sitting with his wife and having a drink. And a person comes up to him and says, "Are you not Charles Plumb? Are you not Charlie Plumb?" So he says, "Yes, I am Charlie Plumb, but I don't know you. Who are you?" And he said, "I'm the person." He said, "You got shot down in Vietnam, right?" He said, "Yes, I did. But again, who are you?" He said, "I'm the guy who packed your parachute." Right. So I'm glad it clearly worked because you're alive and you're here. So I'm the guy who packed your parachute. And at that point, Charlie Plumb thought that how many times have I actually seen this person when I'm going to my plane? How many times have I actually bothered to acknowledge him? How many times have I even realized that my success as a fighter pilot is the culmination of the work of so many people? It's not me and my skill alone which is making me successful. There are people like him, who are packing my parachute. And I think that story has always stuck with me, that who is actually packing your parachute, right? We are all, it's so easy to feel, even individual sports stars. So Roger Federer is one of my favorites, right? So even individual sports stars like him are not successful by themselves. They have trainers, they have physios, they have coaches, they have so many people, their families, their friends. So many people make us who we are in life, okay? And never forget that. And that's why I feel never ever get arrogant. In my books, that is the most, negative leadership trait. Always stay grounded. They say you can aim for the stars, but your feet need to be on the ground. Always remain humble. Always remember that there are many people who are packing parachutes for you, right? The obvious ones are your families, your parents, your spouses, your teachers, etc., etc. But even in life, right? Sometimes it's that person who, when you want a job, right, opens that door for you by giving you an introduction to somebody, and you manage to get a foothold in an organization, and then you manage to move ahead. So always stay grounded in life, stay humble, and always remember that your success is not your own. It is absolutely your competence, and your skills are a big part of that. But there are many other things that actually, go into that. In fact, to get a little philosophical with my age, apologies, but somebody sent me a WhatsApp forward recently, which was really nice. It was a tombstone of on somebody's grave, which says that "मैं अहम था, ये मुझे वहम था," right? Which I think is a fantastic thing, right? That basically that I mean, it essentially means that I used to have the misconception that I'm a great person, right? but actually in reality, I was not. So मैं वहम, मैं अहम था, ये मुझे वहम था. I just thought it was a very nicely written line, right? The next one is this: see people as they are, okay, and not as you are. And this is also an important thing. I'll narrate it by another story. And one thing, by the way, that I'll narrate at the end, another thing, that I'm a big movie watcher. So kind of interestingly, the person on my the first screen in the Zoom thing was somebody called Amir Khan. So that's great, actually, going through life with a name like Amir Khan in this country, right? But the thing is that there is a couple. The story goes as follows: that there is a couple who's sitting inside their house, and through their window, they can actually see the laundry which is left out to dry by the neighbors. And the laundry is looking really dirty. Okay. So they're talking to themselves and they're saying, I wonder why the laundry is dirty. It's pretty odd, isn't it, that, the laundry should be dirty. And this happens for 2 days, 3 days, 5 days. Every day the laundry is dirty, right? The husband and wife are talking, saying, what is the problem with these guys? If they're cleaning their clothes, they can do a good job of it, right? And then one day the wife, comes down and she's thinking to herself, she says, you know what, I'm going to go across today and say, look, do you have a problem with your washing machine or something? I can help. I don't know what the problem is. It's obviously not working well for you guys. And the moment she comes down, she says, all the clothes are looking perfectly clean, right? So she tells her husband, she says, oh, wow, look at this. It's awesome, man. They've finally decided to, do it right. He said, no, actually what happened is that I got up in the morning and I cleaned our windows, right? So this is, I think another great story, because this is the whole thing about diversity and inclusion. We are so fixated in what we think is right that you really almost sometimes don't want to hear what the other person's point of view is. And, in the current day and world, frankly speaking, it's so polarized, right? Sometimes you get into conversations on simple things with friends, right? About whether a movie was good or whether a movie was bad. And you will get absolutely, polarized points of view if you're on the opposite side of an argument, right? And I just think that this is important, that try and see people for who they are, right? Don't try and see people from your lens of how people are. And I think that's what, it's an important thing and a very important distinction, that we try to view things always from our positions, our upbringings, our value systems, what's important to us, etc. Right? And I was telling you about the movie, right? So, and the movie reference, and so there's this really nice movie. Some of you have seen it, called Wonder. It's got Julia Roberts. It's got this boy who's got a deformed face, right? And how he goes into school, and his friends always make fun of him, so he's very hesitant to go to school. And then that boy, in a particular scene, they show that the boy is getting bullied by some people, and the principal calls in the bully and calls in this boy and says, he can't change the way he looks. So why don't you change the way you see, right? And I think that's a really important thing, right? That we have to be able to try and have different perspectives, not just the obvious male-female gender views that we take, but whether it's sexual orientation, whether it's age, whether it's region, whether it's caste, whether there are so many different angles to diversity, right? I know we end up gravitating towards people who are like us, but quite honestly, I think we are that much richer if we actually embrace a diverse point of view. And as I said, I read quite a lot, and oftentimes I try and read alternate points of view, right? I try and read a point of view which is not similar to my own point of view, just to see, is there another picture to it that maybe I'm missing, and maybe I'm not seeing the whole picture because of that. Yeah. Okay. We are done with that, and we are down to slide. This is the last slide, my friends. Okay. The other thing is, whenever you get into a role, or most of what I've said, I think, can apply to personal life and professional life, but I'm coming from the point of view of professional life, right? Don't get into a job to be the caretaker of the status quo. So don't get into a role saying, I'm here to do things as they were done before. Go in with a role saying, I've come in to leave a legacy. I've come in to make this a better role. I've come in to make this a better place. And I will do whatever I can to improve what I inherited so that I can leave something better than what I found. So always try and do this, please. And, my own thing in life is that whatever I've done in life, and whether it's corporate life and frankly, even in my personal life, right? I want to make a difference, right? I want to make a difference in the lives of my team, my organization, my personal relationships. I want people to think that this has become better, after Sameer has actually, been through it, as opposed to it's either remained the same or it's actually deteriorated even more. So don't be the caretaker of the status quo, right? And don't hesitate to create visibility for your achievements. Okay. If you've done something, don't hesitate to create visibility for it. There are, ladies in this batch as well, and I do a lot of speaking on inclusion and diversity. I've been a, diversity and inclusion champion for some time now, over the last decade or so. And women have this issue, I think, more than men, that they hesitate to create visibility for their achievements. Okay, don't hesitate to do that. If you've done something, talk about it, and remember that there is a very fine line, okay, between arrogance and talking about your achievements. So don't tip into clearly the arrogance line. You have to be able to talk about what you achieved, so that at least people, so when you have, a manager who's managing 10, 20, 15 people, oftentimes they aren't necessarily aware of everything that is done, not because they don't invest the time, because they've got a lot on their plate. So it's useful to actually talk about what you've achieved so that people know about it, right? But remember, arrogance, and not arrogance, but visibility. Okay. And then run your own race in life. Everything in life, from the get-go, unfortunately, is competitive, right? It's school results, exam results, everything is competitive, right? It's almost like you're in a race and there's a competition going on. But in reality, frankly, we all have so many different perspectives. We all come from so many different places. There are about 5 people on this call, right? I'm sure there are 85 different individual circumstances, right? Your personal circumstances, your family circumstances, your, what, you want to do in life, what you don't want to do in life. Some people like art, some people like quant stuff, some people like numeracy, some people, like singing, some people like painting, whatever. The point is, you have a personal set of circumstances. Run that race with yourself, say, this is where I want to get to be, right? And I know that comparisons are bound to happen, but for your own peace of mind, right, try and run your own race and appreciate the fact that everybody has a different context and everybody is running their own race, right? And the last point is that, this is an executive MBA batch. You folks are all going to go, you've come from jobs, you're going to go into jobs, etc., right? That money should not be the primary criteria for deciding a job. And, I know this is easier said than done. Money is a really important thing in life for everybody, whether it's for you or for me. It affords us, a lot of things, and therefore it is important. But I'm saying the culture of an organization, the kind of people you work with, the learning opportunities you have, the growth opportunities you can get, the brand that you're joining, the vibe of the organization, right? Everything has to be considered in a holistic fashion, and not to go into a high-paying job which has a toxic culture, which will work you 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, really doesn't care about you as an individual, is only caring about output, not about the individual. Trust me, that money will mean nothing after a point in time, right? So you have to be able to see a holistic point of view. Now, I appreciate that sometimes this wisdom comes later in life and not earlier in life, but hopefully that's the point of sessions like this, that I can tell you this, that, many things go up to making a good role. And I'm talking about a corporate job. Many of you may want to get into, an NGO sector, or some of you may want to become entrepreneurs. I don't know what is it that will be driving you, but do try and take a holistic point of view before, taking a call on what to do. So yeah, that's it. That's the 30 years of wisdom in 3 pages that, hopefully resonates with all of you. But more than that, I'm really happy to, make this an interactive thing and take questions from all of you there. Okay. So Divya, how do you want to do this?
Sir, the now floor is open to the batch for questions.
Okay.
So the first question I would like to start with is that now we live in a VUCA world. We have changing market trends every now and then. And how do you deal with this? What are your strategies, and how do you adapt your company strategies to deal with the VUCA world, the volatility, the ambiguity, the uncertainty?
So I think what has happened in 2020 has been a remarkable thing. I'm sure most of us will remember this as hopefully the defining event of our careers from what has happened globally across the world. And I think it's interesting that my sense is that even out of a crisis like this comes opportunity. And if I look at just KGS, right, things that companies have been thinking of doing for a very long time, right, and have been thinking we'll get to it one day and we'll do it after 3 years or 4 years, or we'll do it at some point, have now all happened. So for example, we've always had a flexible working policy and saying work from home, but now we've decided that we will necessarily tell people that 2 days out of 5 you can work from home, because we worked from home for 1 year. I'm sure we can work from home on an ongoing basis, right? All our onboarding, we've onboarded hundreds of colleagues since mid-March 2020 to today, right? Hundreds of colleagues. all of them been onboarded completely virtually without a problem, right? So much of our learning and development has moved online versus being classroom led and instructor led. So much of it has gone online now, right? And the fact is that we've always prided ourselves on a culture of people centricity, right? And we've always felt that we want to put colleagues at the heart of everything. And if you put colleagues at the heart of everything, the rest will, take care of itself. And I'd like to believe that colleagues have actually experienced in a very positive way the fact that all the decisions that me and my leadership team have taken over the last year or so have been with colleagues at the heart of it, whether it's giving work from home allowances, whether it's when we'll open the offices, whether it's the insurance covers we've tied up with, whether it's the emotional and mental health being sessions we are running for people and so on and so forth. So I think the way to deal with this is to step back and say, okay, now there is a reality which has changed, and there is the term new reality is used very often now, and there's a new reality which has come in. How do we adapt to this new reality? And in the end of it all, even when we go back to office, we are currently not going to go back till May sometime. But when we do go back into office, some of these things, as I told you about virtual onboarding, virtual L&D, so many of the programs that we run will now become permanent programs. We don't feel a need to actually do away. We feel they've actually become very useful in running the organization. Yeah. Okay.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, Surbi. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Surbhi Gupta.
Hello.
I have a question. It's a little bit abstract, and it's. I just want to know your view on this. You talked about not following the status quo, and at times I've seen. I've got a good chance to work with some people who wanted to drive a lot of changes, but at times they wanted to change everything they came across, whereas some of the processes or some of the activities or status quo activities were there to increase the comfort of people rather than block them or increase bureaucracy. So what is your view on uh, such kind of activities where we see that the status quo processes are there to add comfort, and after a while the change should start, but at least at some point till some point they should follow the status quo so that at least they get to a level where from where they can start driving change. So how
Yeah, okay.
a person should
If anybody asks me any difficult question, I'm going to say I can't hear you and the connection's bad, just so that you're clear about it, right? But this one I can hear and I can answer, right? So the thing on this, Surbhi, is that whenever you have to do change, right? All change management will tell you that you have to win the hearts and minds of people, and then only change happens. Otherwise, if you do change and don't get people, behind it, it will fail. And I think if you think of what is the payoff between, I'll give you an example in our organization. What is the payoff between being commercial and economic and colleague satisfaction and colleague engagement? Okay, so that's a trade-off we have to do very often. So for example, as I told you, when we said that we have to pay a work from home allowance to everybody, okay, so we are 12,000 people. So we paid it to a certain category of individuals. That total amount was actually very expensive. Okay, but we still feel that there was a strong need to actually make sure that colleagues got that so that they could buy whatever they could for their home as a one-time expense is going to be an ongoing thing. So there, for example, as I told you, that there was a change we were wanting to implement. There was a commercial impact of it, and it was, working on the positive side for colleagues. On the flip side, I'll tell you another example where we used to give financial rewards to colleagues for completing certain tenures in the organization. So 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, right? So we would give them, certain financial values at the completion of those tenures. And when we did a market analysis, right, we found out that what we were doing was actually more generous than what the market was doing. Okay. And therefore we took the call that for certain milestones, as an example, a 10-year anniversary is a big anniversary, or we feel a 5-year anniversary is a big anniversary, right? That we will still do, financial benefits, but we will lower them. And for some of the others, we will decide to give you certificates, etc. Now, initially there was some pushback from colleagues. They said, hey, this is not making us feel good and all. But I think somewhere people need to understand that every organization has a certain set of funding and a certain budget and certain money to do things. Now, if you if you want something, then normally something else has to stop being done or not being done. And I think that's what this trade-off always is in change, right? That to your point, if retaining something creates comfort, and that comfort is very important for that organization, right, and is generally in line with market, then there is no point doing that change. There's no point trying to be a change agent when change is not required. But in the example of I gave you of the anniversary awards, right, where you moved out of market, right, and hopefully people don't work with an organization because they get a certain sum of money at the end of 10 years or 5 years. You're working there for so many other things rather than that, right? That's great to have, but if you don't have it, fine, you feel that you have a great culture in an organization that you're part of, right? So that's the way I would think of change.
Hello, sir.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir. My name is Akshay. You are a speaker on diversity and inclusion, and you have received a award also, like the Inclusion Leadership Award in 2018. I did a little bit research on you. So, the thing is, I am from CEAS committee, which is a committee for awareness, sensitization, and empowerment, which is also related to diversity and inclusion. But what I have seen and I have read is that diversity is mostly about numbers, and inclusion is about the mindset. Companies mostly they make policies and frameworks, and every company has certain policy and frameworks, but to implement those policies and frameworks is quite difficult. It requires that kind of man's mindset, and it can be sometimes difficult to make sure the senior leaders walk the talk. And I want to know something that you have done in KGS that really changed that mindset. Like you said that you really want to leave a legacy in every company. I want to know how did you do it, and how students can do it as well in
I think, see, Akshay, this is a great question. So thank you for reading up as well. And this is for the benefit. Again, I'm just repeating what's important, that inclusion is far more difficult to drive than diversity. Okay, because diversity is actually about numbers. So if we have to hire, let's say more women, it's easy to hire more women. But can you actually get women, for example, more integrated and feel that there is no difference between how their careers are moving and how a man's career are moving? Or when we hire differently abled people, or we hire people with different sexual orientation, etc., getting people through the door is not so difficult. Diversity is about basically it's about numerical things, about have you achieved this certain number. Inclusion is very, very difficult to drive, right? Because inclusion is all about your own beliefs, your mindsets, your unconscious biases, how you think about people, etc., etc. And I think the good thing, Akshay, as you said, is that some of these things, they have to be driven from top down, right? So I'm super passionate about it. Okay, all my teams know I'm super passionate about it. I talk about it in every forum, and I see all kinds of metrics to ensure that we are moving in the right direction. So as an example, one is the obvious male-female ratio, right? But the thing is, when we are doing our year-end performance reviews, we see promotion percentage of women and men, right? We see salaries of men and women at the same grades. We look at, the obvious metrics of, how many managers versus non-female, male by grade, etc., right? We see rating curves and see whether male and females are largely getting rated in the same way. We see our colleague engagement scores, and we see them from a male-female point of view to make sure that men and women are more or less in the same range on a series of questions, right? We tell people, and we evidence it, that we have zero tolerance for inappropriate behavior, right? So if there is a sexual harassment issue that comes up, which is established and it is proven, we have no tolerance for things like this, right? So there is a lot of walking the talk, and then there's a lot of data that gets actually seen to make sure that people keep hearing this, but they are not, still doing the wrong things on the ground. So for example, just recently, in fact, we have a mid-year promotion cycle. And one thing we decided is that at the senior levels for us, that's defined as a director, any woman going through a interview everybody has to go through a panel of 3 people. And we've decided if every woman has to go through an interview, at least one woman will be on that panel, right? So we want to take out all those, potential biases and all that exists. So there's a lot of things that we do. And frankly speaking, I'm delighted that, the organization KGS and KPMG actually has won awards for, top 10 organizations for women to work in, that, our colleague engagement surveys don't have too many differences between men and women. And generally speaking, when I talk to women colleagues in the organization, they all feel that there is no difference between what they experience as a career or recognition versus what they feel their male counterparts are. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for your answer.
Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes, Samir, sir. First of all, thank you for accepting the invite. It's great to listen to you. And my question is pertaining to career transformation. So this has hints of your speech you gave on CEO's chair. So it will be partly derived from it as well. I've also researched you a little bit like Akshay.
Thank you.
So I've tracked your journey from Barclays to KPMG, and you talked about you had to go through a process of unlearning and relearning over there, right? And you've talked about having that growth mindset. So we are at that crossroads right now where like I am from an engineering background and now I have graduated to management college, right? So we all will have to undertake that transformative journey where we'll have to go what we've learned before and then augment it and move it in a certain way that can really help us in that transformation, because we'll be now in leadership roles. Whereas earlier, most of us used to be in IT companies where we could be holding technical roles. So you've also transitioned from that role. You talked about learning HR as a new move. So what really helped in that transformation, and what can we do so that it really aids us in our journey?
Yeah, so Praneeth, thank you for that. So again, in my career, so I've done, this is my 6th job. I've worked 30 years. I actually thought maybe I'll have done maybe a couple of jobs less than I've ended up doing, but something or the other, some fork in the road came through and I decided to then make a change. I started off actually with FMCG, right? When I was with Nestle. And then I moved into outsourcing, offshoring financial services, right? So Barclays, ICICI, OneSource, Lehman Brothers, Bank of America. So that's the thing. And then I moved into professional services, which is the Big Four, and I'm now in KGS. Okay. And so that is, one is a functional, I've been moving industries. The other is when I go from, all of you at some point are going to be, as you go through your careers, you're going to become more senior. And the inflection point for me, at least, I think, was in Barclays when I was the chief operating officer and I became the chief executive officer, right? And nothing actually prepares you for that. I have to say that nothing does. Okay, I read a lot, I kind of talk to people, I kind of try to keep myself, educated on things. But when you are the person who then is responsible for everything in that organization, ultimately, right, that you are the one who has to take the calls, you are the one who's responsible if something, doesn't go well, that is a very overwhelming feeling. And I have to say that the first 3 to 4 months in Barclays was a very nerve-wracking period for me, right? Because you always feel like an imposter, right? You feel somebody's going to ask you something and you're not going to know the answer, and you're the CEO, so you'll have to pretend you know the answer, and then you're not sure whether you're saying the right thing or not, right? Similarly, when I moved into KPMG, honestly, it's a completely different industry from banking, completely different, right? And again, as you join as the top of the house, it's expected that you'll have answers, and the honeymoon period finishes in 3 months, and then they expect you to know everything, right? So the point on all of this is, Praneeth and the others, is that this vulnerability that you feel when you're moving from engineering into, MBA, or when you're changing jobs or cities or countries or roles or whatever, you'll do so many things will be different as you guys go through your career, right? The only way that I grapple with it is that I get stuck into detail, and I really get stuck into that, knowing that business. So KPMG has this saying that become a student of the firm, right? So learn as much about the organization as you can, not just the area you're in, but learn about the organization. So, I found a couple of people who kind of have been in the Big Four for a long time, and literally one of them used to do tutorials with me. He used to say, okay, this is what this is, this is what this is, this is how this runs. And honestly, I don't really feel too much shame in asking for help or saying I don't know. So when I don't know, I'll tell people I don't know, right? And I think, so there are these 2 individuals in the firm who really actually helped me understand the Big Four, how it is set up. And then I did reviews on reviews and reviews and reviews and tried to understand the business, right? So technology, so I guess, I don't know how many of you are engineers here, right? But I'm not a technologist. My whole career has been operations, general management, etc. And if you don't know technology today, then you're at a disadvantage. You have to understand how technology works, right? So there is this one individual in KPMG. He is my tech guru, right? And it's very interesting. I will leave him a voice note saying, please explain time to time. So ultimately speaking, when you make transitions in careers, right, there is no substitute for understanding what you are doing, right? Whether I went from a COO to a CEO, from an FMCG to a bank, from a bank to a big four. That butterfly in stomach moment has to happen for everybody, right? Or 95% of people it will happen for, right? Maybe 5% are, they're generally fine with, change and all that. But for 95% of people it will happen. You have to get stuck down in it. You have to get into detail. You have to understand what it is. And, the good thing for me is I'm an accountant by education. So, I'm comfortable getting into detail, right? So that's the way at least I have managed so far in my career.
And sir, just a follow-up. Thank you for that, sir. Just a follow-up question on what you just said. So when you transition from that number 2 to number 1 slot, so in corporate life, you do feel pressure, and inherently what happens is we try to transmit that pressure down to those who are below us, right? So how have you managed to deal with that pressure as well? Because inherently we all have worked in organizations, and we've seen that when the managers feel pressures, they try to relay it down or thrust it down to those who are below us. So how have you managed to deal with it in such a way that it leads to positive impact?
So, I think again, that's a question, and the tendency is to put pressure down the line, right? And let's take the two organizations where I've been in, let's say roles which have been the chief exec of Barclays and now in KPMG, right? I've had great teams, frankly, surrounding me. A lot of the teams are team members actually, and me have a very, we are almost like friends, and you have that chemistry that goes on. And when you have good chemistry and a good culture in an organization, whatever pressure you face, right? Pressure can be positive pressure and negative pressure. You're talking about, let's say, negative pressure and stresses that, numbers are not happening. How do you turn it around? How do you fix this? How do you fix that? If you've got camaraderie in a team and you have chemistry, that pressure becomes very manageable. And for me, that has just been always the routine. I'm in, my whole leadership style is very people oriented in either case, right? And therefore I'm in touch with people from 3, 4, 5 jobs back, right? So, I'm in touch with people are in touch with me, and the fact is I always feel that we spend so much time at work, right? Probably more time at work than we do, outside of work other than sleeping, right? But the point is, therefore, I always feel that at least the vibe in a company should end up becoming like not very different from what you feel when you're with friends and family. You should be able to enjoy yourself. You should be able to, have a laugh. You should be able to work hard. You should be able to, play hard. That cliched saying about work hard, play hard. But actually, I've always seen that if you have good camaraderie running with your team, pressure is actually fairly manageable.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
Hi, sir. This is Aishwarya here. I had a question for you. I think primarily spinning off from the diversity and inclusion conversation that we had, right? What I've noticed oftentimes is in organizations where diversity and inclusion is spoken about a lot, and my previous organization was one as well, right? There are always certain whispers around, your mettle is doubted as a woman, that you maybe got the next promotion because, they had to get that number done, or, you potentially got the job because of the same, or the ratio of hiring was in a particular way because they wanted to hire a woman. How do you actually get over that kind of, because you may know that you didn't get it because of that, but how do you get over that feeling and, still plow through?
Great question, Aishwarya. And I think, I was just scanning through the scroll of 85. I think I'm not sure, Divya, how many women there are, probably about 10, 12 in this batch, and rest are men, I think?
I think 17.
17 women, okay.
17% of the
women.
17% women, okay, great. No, so I think this is, whenever I talk about this this topic in office, right? We get men and women both are part of meetings and all that. I always tell them that, the men shouldn't think that this is reverse discrimination, because sometimes the point you're making is it can exactly happen that people feel that, what is the point, right? That there seems to be a big demand for competent women, and therefore, it's no good and they'll always get the role and we won't and all that. I always tell men that it is not reverse discrimination. As I told you, I have 2 sons. So I don't have daughters. So it's not as if I'm trying to change the world and make it a better place because I have daughters who are going to come out into the workforce, and I have 2 boys. But I fundamentally believe that women, especially working mothers, have a lot of things which they have to deal with, which more often than not, men don't have to deal with. So fact of the matter is, I've been stuck at home for, like what I said, 1 year. I have to tell you that the one realization I've had is the amount of work it takes to run a house. it is just astonishing how much work goes into running a house. You just think it's an easy thing to do, but it's actually a lot of hard work, right? And I feel that working women or working mothers, especially within that, right, who have to take care of children, who have to, take care of homes, because, regrettably, the load of home work, elder care, etc., still falls disproportionately on women rather than on men, right? So my feeling is that there are a lot of things that women at work have to deal with that men don't have to deal with. So all we are trying to do is create an equal track for people, right? We are not creating a fast track for women. We don't want women to progress faster than men are progressing. We just want it to be an equal track. And the point you make, this is actually a critical thing, because when you go out hiring, you have to make sure that what you're hiring is competence. You have to make sure that you are not hiring a woman. You're hiring a competent woman. And if you don't get a competent woman, then you will hire the competent man. And I think this is where sometimes people get caught up in this trap, because, if you put targets around things like diversity and inclusion, sometimes it has, the law of unintended consequences, that because it's easy to keep ticking boxes and hiring women as an example, you'll get people who may not necessarily be the right people for the role, right? So therefore, I think hopefully we can get men to understand that it is competence that is being hired and it is an equal track that is being created. We are not trying to create a fast track. And the worst outcome for women as a group can be what you just said, that people start doubting your success. The success then doesn't become your own success. It becomes because, oh yeah, you were lucky, and nowadays everybody is pushing women, so you also got pushed along with that push, right? That's the worst outcome that can happen for a woman, right? So I think it's a great question. And when maternity leave, maternity leave right now in the country is 6 months by law, but KPMG had it as 6 months even before the law, right? And when we introduced it, frankly speaking, a lot of men and leaders, not necessarily, leaders, right, had problems, saying, isn't that something really quite something? Because ultimately work has to happen, right? So if a woman happens to go on leave or mat leave for 6 months, somebody has to do the work. Who's going to do the work, right? So there was that kind of pushback. But the fact is, these kind of things have to be done, right? These kind of laws have to be passed. These kind of progressive policies have to be done so that women have the opportunity to actually have an equal shot of, having a career on the same path as a man. And therefore, the answer to you, I can talk a lot about this topic because it's actually close to my heart, but the answer to your question is that men, all of you on this, the whatever you just said, 17%, right? So the 83% male population on this, please understand that this is not about male discrimination. This is not reverse discrimination. We are trying to create an equal path, and we are trying to hire competence. You have spouses, you have sisters, you have mothers. I'm sure all of you, will want them to work in progressive organizations which value women and actually want them to actually progress on the same path as, the men are.
Thank you very much for answering my question. Thank you.
Okay.
So I have a question.
Good.
So you said there is a fine line between being arrogant and creating visibility for your success. Suppose even after best of our effort, if someone perceives us as being arrogant, how would I know whether I need to be more humble, or the other person needs to open his mind? Basically, how do I know where to draw the line?
And again, Anirudh, see some of these things, right, based on, sometimes all you need to do is go into an organization, ask about, what do you think about this individual? And somebody will come back and say, yeah, bahut acha banda hai, he's a really nice guy. He's arrogant at everything, and he's always trying to make other people's achievement become his achievements, and so on and so forth. Right now, see, this thing of how you are landing with somebody. Are you landing as arrogant versus are you landing about talking about this thing? It's a very personalized thing, and mostly, frankly speaking, you should be able to pick up when you're talking to somebody that are they actually perceiving it as one thing or the other. The bigger problem is that some supervisors kind of don't even want to hear about what you are doing and all. And that's, some people, the worst kind of supervisor you can get in corporate life, trust me, is the insecure leader, right? Who's insecure about your competence, because they'll always then be wanting to make sure that you don't shine and your achievements end up becoming their achievements, and, so on and so forth. And credit will be taken, and, blame will be assigned downwards, etc. But normally speaking, I would like to think that just a general, just a general interaction, when you talk to friends, you can make out immediately which ones are, थोड़ा ज़्यादा ही बोलते रहते हैं यार all the time, छोटी-छोटी बातों में इतनी बड़ी चीजें बना के कर देते हैं, versus the guys who are always muted, and somebody does a big thing also, they'll try and make it sound small, and whenever somebody says congratulations, they'll say, then it's not me, it's the team, right? There are people who come back, and versus somebody who just takes somebody else's credit only and starts trying to make it, somebody does a research report. Let's say you guys put out a research report, 10 of you have put it together, and say you send it to somebody and they say, great report. The first guy who puts up his hand and says, "मैंने इस पे काम किया था," right? There are 10 people who worked on that report, boss. You're not the only one who's contributed to that whole thing, right? So the point I'm making is, in a roundabout way, Anirudh, is that you can normally make out how you're landing with people. If you have people around you, normally you should be able to get the messaging from them that, I think this is going over the top rather than trying to create visibility for yourself. It's a fine line. It's a fine line. And that's why I'm saying be careful, right? There's a difference between, there are these, there used to be this term class participation ke liye question pooch rahe hain log, right? Just because you want to get noticed by somebody senior, you'll ask some question, some random question will get asked, which you have no head or foot and all that. I mean, people are intelligent enough to know when, people are trying to get noticed or whether they actually have genuinely doing some real content behind them.
Sir,
Yeah.
Suyash.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
So this is Suyash. One question from my side as well. You
Yeah.
mentioned that people generally surround themselves with people they like. So how do we ensure that we build diverse networks that have multiple perspectives? Any tips that you can provide us?
This Suyash has to be, and your name is, I pronounce it as Suyash?
Sir, Suyash.
Suyash. So Suyash. So this you have to do very, measured, specific thing. You have to be able to actually, do it. It's not going to happen by itself. So you have to try and seek out people. Like I said, I read a lot, and so Indian politics, as an example, is a topic that interests me, right? So I'm always interested in reading two sides of the same argument, just trying to figure out, what is the full picture rather than one, right? So I'm giving an example of writing, and this doesn't need to be, you don't have to necessarily seek out, like I said, it doesn't have to be gender, etc. It can be anything. It can be differences of opinion. It can be differences of, region. If you are from the north, colleagues from the south or your friends from the south, we may have a slightly different view. From the west, will have a different view, etc. So this is something that, and that's why sometimes they say it's great to get reverse mentored, right? Reverse mentoring is a big thing, because it's great to actually get mentored by somebody who has, let's say, from a technology point of view, so much more ease with it than some of the people who are not so familiar with technology have, right? Like I said, I've decided that I want to understand technology, and I'm by nature a very curious person, right? So I found this individual, and whether he likes it or not, he's become my tutor, right? And I told you that I keep asking him to keep educating me. So you have to be able to actively seek out these views rather than always hanging out with people who are what are called echo chambers. So you have a point of view, they'll have the point of view, everybody will have the same point of view, and everybody will say, "Haan, bahut sahi baat hai," right? But how do you get a slightly different point of view? So and that can only happen on either by reading alternate points of view or deliberately making sure that you seek out people who are differing in their thought process and in the way they are.
Thank you, sir. That answers my question.
Okay.
So this is Shilpi here.
Yeah. Hi.
So you've said so many times you read a lot. What, as a book lover myself, so what are some books that you would recommend? Even on real leadership, you said politics, you liked reading about Indian politics. Some good examples of books,
No, so the thing is, it's interesting. I wish I could switch this around and show the camera in my bookshelf. I've got a bookshelf. I have 10, 12 books which are just lying. I keep buying them. I'm magnetically attracted to books, and when I read them or not is a separate matter, but I keep buying them. Right now I'm reading a very interesting book on Flipkart called the $1 Billion. I think it's called the what is it called? It's called, I think, the $1 Billion Club or something, or some $1 Billion Sale, I think it's called. I just finished reading I just finished reading Barack Obama's autobiography, which that took me a lot of time to read. Like, it's like about 701 pages. It really took me a lot of time to read that. I read Shashi Tharoor has written a couple of very interesting books, which, I have read, right? There are lots of, commentators, Rajdeep Sardesai and, others who have written books, which, one reads. I read Ruchir Sharma is another very interesting author. I kind of read some of his books, but right now I'm reading this, as I said, this book on Flipkart, and then I've got another book which is on WeWork and the entire story of WeWork. So I don't read too much fiction. Mostly I read, business books. And for me, when I was growing up, the books which I used to read and underline were Jack Welch's autobiography. If you guys have not read Jack Welch's autobiography called Straight from the Gut and Winning, please read them, right? Because, I used to always think that so I'm a big fan of Jack Welch and I'm a big fan of Indra Nooyi. And the reason I am is that they have the ability to make complicated things sound simple. And that is what I think leadership is all about. Can you make complex things sound simple? Everybody can make things sound complicated, but can you make them sound simpler? And I used to always, earlier on in my career and, mid-stage and on, sometimes when I used to get really bogged down at work and say, oh my God, how do I move forward? Right? I used to say, if Jack Welch can run GE, and that has like 20 different, different industries within one company, then why should I be craving about doing the job I'm doing? I'm sure I can do it. If he can run GE, then I can run this job I'm doing. So yeah, so those are the kind of stuff I read.
Thank you, sir. I think, sir, Indra Nooyi, when she was asked what is leadership, that's what she said. She said that breaking down the complex concepts into simpler form.
On this, right, there are these couple of great quotes. One is, of course, there's a famous quote by Einstein, right, which says that if you can't explain something simply enough, then you don't understand it well enough. So that's, I think, a really interesting quote. And the other is, I always find it fascinating how complicated things can be made to sound simple. So I read this somewhere that Bill Gates' mother, right? So Bill Gates' wife, Melinda Gates, right? When they got married, she said, my mother-in-law told me that she said, to whom much is given, much is expected from. Okay. And I think that's such a powerful way when you try to think of corporate social responsibility and citizenship and community giving and, all of the stuff that is so important in the world nowadays. It's such a beautiful thing to say that to whom much is given, much is expected. And those kind of things I feel are beautiful, and most people relate to simplicity. And that's what, one of the things when people ask me at times, what does it feel like to be the CEO of a company, etc., right? And as I said, I watch movies. So in the Spider-Man franchise, there is this great line which says, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And I think that is exactly what I feel like. That yes, okay, it's cool to feel that you're the CEO of a company. At the end of the day, it's got a lot of responsibility. I'm responsible for 12,000 people in this company, and that, their careers and their future and their how good they're feeling and do they enjoy working in this organization or not. So, a bit of a digression, Shilpi. Sorry, but.
No, sir, that was nice, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So with the new technologies of artificial intelligence and blockchain technology, we need upskilling of employees and the business model to change, and that too drastically. So how has KPMG been able to do that, and what is your strategy regarding that?
So we've got a lot of investment in L&D. We do a lot of investment. So we are tied up with LinkedIn Learning. We kind of have tie-ups with Coursera. So we do a bunch of stuff. So I forget the exact number, but we are doing we're doing 60 hours per employee per year or some number like that, some very high number. So we are very focused on staying at the cutting edge of technology and giving people all the kind of training that is appropriate for helping them in their jobs, right? So we have a very large, in the 12,000 people that we have a fairly large technology implementation practice, right? So we do a lot of business transformation, and part of business transformation is technology transformation. So that unit does just an exceptional amount of, learning and development through tie-ups we have, through programs we arrange, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, we are not doing anything remarkable, which is not what every company is doing, but we really believe that the ability to grow is a very fundamental thing that we want to make sure that colleagues, when they join us, have the access to. Yep.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, so Prithviraj here. So when you talked about change management, you said it's all about rallying the people behind your cause or behind your thought. So we have studied that you can convince people by using three aspects: logos, pathos, and ethos. So what kind of argument or what kind of which of these three do you use most when you are trying to convince people or get them behind your cause?
So I'm going to tell you that I can't hear what you're saying, but the thing is that I'm not familiar with those three that you told me. So just tell me what they mean. I'll tell you how we drive change.
So the logos means logic, reasoning, and proof. Pathos means emotional and value aspect, and ethos means your credibility and trust.
Okay.
So, out of
Thank
these
you.
three, which you
Yeah.
use the most?
So I think in change, change to be driven has to be communicated effectively and very frequently, and people have to see a very clear benefit in it for them, right? So it is based on the three that you said. It's a combination of appealing to logic on why this change is necessary, whether there's a financial reason, a market reason, or if the process is outdated or inefficient, and there is an emotional reason. What difference will it make to your life by doing this change, right? So I think a combination of both of them, and then repetitive communication, okay, to make sure that the message lands, and forums for people to come back and tell you how are they experiencing that change. And an example is technology is people often implement new tools and technology, right? So the question is, after that technology is landed, you may have prepared as much as you can for the rollout and the UATs and the trainings and all of that stuff, but ultimately, how do colleagues feel about it when they're using it on the ground, right? So there has to be a closed loop from why we are doing it, what does it make a difference to you, communicating it, then figuring out whether it's landed well. If it's not landed well, what do we need to change, and then go back to the top of the cycle again.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Sumit. Yeah.
So my question is that when you're making the change and you're in the position of making some tough decisions, so how much is the decision making based on like mostly data driven, or is it intuition based as well? And if it's data driven, like what are your favorite metrics you may be using?
I think all decisions have largely to be based on data only, right? Intuitive kind of things. It's difficult to actually take big decisions, at least on intuition rather than data. So it's always and I'm maybe because of my chartered accountancy grounding, or generally speaking, I'm a fairly analytical and, I'm comfortable with numbers. So I think data for sure. And, the example, Sumit, as I gave you, is when you're trying to drive diversity and inclusion, right? So what kind of metrics are you really seeing, right? Are you seeing performance ratios being similar, hiring ratios, salary ranges, are you seeing rating distributions, etc.? Because it's easy to say that I don't think that this is happening versus, for example, and data, it's interesting. And we have a lot of data and analytics work that happens in KPMG. We've got a bunch of really smart guys doing that. And the best quote I read on data ever is that it said that if you torture data long enough, it will confess. Right. And I just thought that was fantastic, right? Because if you for example, we once did an analysis recently about early attrition, people who are leaving within 1 year of joining, right? And intuitively, you'll feel that is happening more in this unit versus another. Okay. But in reality, the analysis showed us is also happening in another unit, which we didn't think was happening, right? Then you go 3 levels down and figure out why it's happening, what is the reason for that, and so on and so forth, right? And so I personally find data, very fascinating and really very interesting. And I definitely believe that any big decisions that happen need to be based around data.
Thank
you. Okay.
So what are the new age skills and technology, or the skill set that we need to acquire like in this next 5 months?
But you can't keep asking all the questions. I'm not going to answer it. There are like 84 people on this call, right? So I'm assuming that somebody else has a question. Actually, I'm great. It's like so interactive. It's so much fun. I will come back to that question. Apologies. I will come back to it. I'm just trying to give an opportunity to others to.
Sir, if I may ask a question.
Again, you, Praneeth, have just asked the question, but go on. Yeah.
So, sir, you said that the hallmark of great leaders is that when the team does well, then they bless the team and say it wasn't an individual effort, but a team effort, right? But the conundrum is that when you are at the helm, then you cannot pass the buck. And when the failure starts rolling in, and when the team is not able to deliver, people say that you haven't delivered. So when people say failure is because of you, do you think it's justified? Because when it's the positive side of things, it's the hallmark of great leaders, and they say that they weren't alone in it. So don't you think failure and success both should be equally distributed within the team? Because people have that self-serving bias, but companies try to logically defy it as well. So when it's successful, we all are successful, but when it's failure, it's mostly thrust upon the man who's at the top. So what's your perception about it?
So I think, again, it's a really interesting question. The point is, I feel sometimes that if something has not gone well in KGS, right, as the person who runs that organization, I have the ability to influence outcomes. I have the ability to say, if you want to hire more people, go ahead and hire more people. If you think there is a blocker and some team is not helping you, tell me, I'll unblock it, etc., etc. Therefore, I feel at some levels, while, failure like success, you can argue is a team sport, and everybody is responsible for it in some shape or form. But I think the more senior you become, right, and forget me as the guy who's running the company, right, but if you think of a team which has 10 members in it, and that is doing a horrible job, then at some point you have to say that the manager needs to be, is the manager good at identifying poor performers? Is the manager good at addressing poor performance? Is the manager good at skilling people? Is the manager good at coaching people? Is the manager doing the right things in terms of hiring the right people? It does come down to the person who has the authority to take the decisions to change the outcome of something. So to that extent, I think it is fair that the guy on the top,
right,
takes the brunt of something which doesn't go well. I do feel that is true. So I'm quite clear. If something doesn't go wrong in KGS, I delegate it down to my team. So I'm very clear about that. They're also very clear. I'm also very clear. So sorry, but Divya, coming back to you, you were asking a question about what we need to be on top of. You were saying, yeah. What was the question about new skills?
I was asking about that changing current market trends and this VUCA world. How do we need to upskill ourselves, and what kind of sources of literature or study or books that you would like to recommend us for the next 5 months we are in this course, so that we enter with good information into the senior management, mid-management roles?
And if that book doesn't work out, like Praneeth saying, you can say that some CEO from KPMG came and he recommended this book. It was horrible, and it made no difference to us. Anyway, it's not okay. I won't answer that in terms of books, right? Because, or not just books, but literature. Because honestly, all of you, I'm sure, are completely aware of the great thing nowadays is that you have information available at your fingertips to actually go through, right? I mean, where has this happened? I mean, there's so many times I'm reading a book, right? And I'm one of those who doesn't like reading Kindle and, soft copy. So I need that, that book in my hand. So I'm quite old fashioned that way, right? But you read a word which you don't understand. You're seeing a movie, there's some context, you're not understanding what they're saying. You immediately go to your phone, open Google, put it in, and you have the answer, right? And whether it's Coursera or Udemy, or whether it's, any LinkedIn learning, you talk about it, right? And there is infinite wisdom available at the touch of a button almost, right? So I'm not going to tell you so much about those, because one thing I will say that it's important to be on top of technology, right? Now, you may be a technologist, i.e. you may be an engineering graduate who understands technology very well, or you may not be, or you may be an arts or a commerce person who's the user of technology. But I'm not an expert in technology, but I know how to use technology to make my organization more effective and efficient, right? So you need to be able to, so that's just one thing around technology at a domain level. But the one skill I think all of you who are going to be, getting into the workforce and progressing is that you'll have to deal with ongoing ambiguity, right? And you'll just have to be able to deal with that very uncomfortable feeling of not being in control all the time, okay? And there's this, I tell people that you have to become comfortable becoming uncomfortable. And it's not easy, because as human beings, you want no change. You want to do the same things again and again, right? So whether you're changing a job, you're changing a house, you're changing your shoes, you're changing your clothes, everything just feels, we all have that favorite thing that we love wearing and all. And, you kind of want to just gravitate towards that all the time. I'm giving a tactical kind of example. But all of you, I keep telling my sons this, that you have to now get used to dealing with ambiguity. Today, you're in a corporate doing well. Tomorrow, there's a global restructuring. You could be out of a job, right? Not because of any fault of yours, just because that's the way the organization has decided to actually structure something slightly differently. So I think try and build those skills. And you can ask, so how do you build those skills? The only answer I can tell you is that you have to find that resilience within yourself, right? You have to have that emotional maturity in yourselves. You have to have networks that you can reach out to for help. You have to have friends who you can talk to. You have to have mentors who you can speak to. You have to have somebody who you can bounce off things rather than trying to deal with it all in your own head. But this VUCA world, as you referenced, right? Ambiguity is here to stay. It's going nowhere. And I just feel that the way technology is changing, right? That companies that you haven't even heard of, right? And in 2 or 3 years, they're multi-billion-dollar companies. And how many, we've all read about how Airbnb is bigger than all the hotels, and Tesla's market cap is higher than all the auto manufacturers, and how, how companies which have come from very, weren't doing that well even 7, 10, 8 years ago, and now suddenly have zoomed into, prominence in the world. So we have to get used to that. No way out of it. I only have 6 to 8 years in my career, so I have less to deal with than you guys. So you guys have to deal with it a lot, right? So I'm sorry, I know this is supposed to be an inspiring talk, so I hope I'm not doing the reverse by de-inspiring you.
No, sir, not at all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Hello, sir.
Good evening.
Okay, hi, Ravi.
So I have one question. Since you said that 2 or 3 years or as such years, here and there in the career won't matter in the long run. But currently we are in the beginning of our career choices. And it seems a lot to digest in, and we have a lot of options present in front of us. Say, for example, I get into consulting and 2 years down the line, I don't like consulting. So how should we deal about this, go about this at this moment in our career?
No, good point, Ravi. And I think all I would ask is that before you, so see, life is also about trying to find out what you don't like versus what you do like, right? Ultimately, you have to gravitate towards what you like, but how do you get to that process of elimination is important to your point, right? My only ask and request of all of you is that if something is not working, give it time to at least play out so that you can be sure, right? Don't decide in 6 months, a year and a half that, no, this is not for me. The point is, they say that in a role, if a minimum of 3 years is required, right? The first year you're learning, the second year you're doing it, the third year actually contributing to how that can become better. Allow yourself time, have some patience. All of you are, I would love to be at this age again, right? You have so much of your lives ahead of you, right? But don't knock something. And, I see resumes 6 months here, 9 months there. Now, if somebody's, role has been made redundant, I totally understand that. That is outside your control. But if you're switching from, give time to at least understand whether if you move into a consulting world, do you enjoy consulting or do you not enjoy consulting? And how can you understand that till you have done 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 assignments to figure out, no, actually, this is not for me, right? Whether you like numbers or whether you like art or whether you want to go into a non-governmental organization or you want to be in a commercial organization, you can't know any of these things till you allow yourself some time, right? So that's what I would say. Just give yourself some time. And hopefully, I tell everybody that, hopefully you manage to join a company where when you get up in the morning, more days than not, you enjoy going to that company, right? You enjoy going to work, you enjoy your friends, you enjoy your peers, you got a good relationship, the company's got a nice, easy vibe about it. And, nobody can have a perfect, organization. You'll be feeling, you'll be hating your boss at some point, you'll be unhappy with the project at some point, something will be going, wrong. But if 80% of the time you can feel great about an organization, right? That's what you should aspire to get into.
Thank you, sir, for that. And just to add just an extension question for that. So if you are given a chance like to go back and reset some decision that you made regarding your career choices, would you do that right now?
Yeah. And this is a question I get asked often, but honestly, I'm very happy with where I am. So I don't think if I could go back, I would have not joined this or not joined that or done this or done that. And, anything, I've done 6 jobs, as I said, 2 of them were for 8 years, and the rest were slightly of different differing tenures. No regrets in 6 years. I'm very happy. In fact, one thing I will tell you guys, and again, you'll have to bear with my age in this comment, right? One thing I do feel I wish I could change when I go back is the amount of time I spent with my parents, right? Because both my parents are no longer alive, right? And, that's one relationship in life that you always think they're there, right? And parents are always there, right? That's the only relationship in the world, I think, which has no expectation, from an individual. They do not have expectations from the children other than for them to do well and for them to actually be happy in life, etc., etc. Every other relationship in life has a give and a take. Everybody wants something for something in return, right? And so I think if I could go back in life, right, I wish I could have spent more time with my parents. And so for those of you, just keep that lesson in mind, that sometimes these things of, if you're not living with your parents, right, the thing about आज नहीं मिलता, कल मिल लूंगा, आज नहीं फोन करूंगा, परसों कर लूंगा, परसों नहीं करूंगा, I'll do it after 1 week, 1 week के बाद नहीं तो 2 हफ्ते, 1 month, etc., etc. Do it when you can, do it when you have the time, right? And that extends to other things as well, Ravi, right? That friend who you haven't spoken to for ages and ages, करूंगा, बस करने वाला हूं, I'm too busy, right? We all have time. It's the question of busyness is not so much of busyness as it is, it's not a priority for you, that's why you're not doing it, right? If you want to work out, you will work out. You'll find that time. I have friends of mine who are fitness enthusiasts. They will, whatever is happening, they will be working out, right? So these are the kind of things I think, which, I wouldn't make any changes in my career choices, but maybe some of the relationships that one felt that one should invest more time in, maybe I would invest more in them.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon. My name is
Hello.
Rahul.
Hello, Rahul.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It will surely add value to our perspective. So my question is related to the consulting. So consulting is a field practiced from years by visiting clients and solving their problems. But now in current scenario, most of the companies are visiting clients virtually. So how do you see towards consulting being going towards virtual service provider? So do you think in coming years, the consulting will be done virtually completely?
I think, Rahul, thanks. So consulting, I think, will end up becoming a combination of, on-site, being with clients, and being, remote and working. I think, if anything, this has shown that, you can effectively work remotely and, there's not too much productivity loss. Okay. The point is that in consulting or in any other, business, relationships, networks, chemistry, and all is very important. That is not so easy to do at the end of a Zoom call like this, right? For that, it's important to meet people. The thing I miss the most, frankly, is, that, again, like I said, I'm quite people-centric in the way I am. I miss walking around, talking to people, building that relationship, having those informal conversations, right? So my sense is delivery, whether it's happening remotely. So let's take an American client, whether that work is happening remotely in the US or remotely in India or Philippines or wherever else in the world, that business case is now very strong. Everybody knows it can be done, okay, because it has been done and it's been done effectively for over a year. And as I said, nothing has really changed. But I think the front end of it, the sales, the selling, the market development, the business development, that is not easy to do in a virtual environment. So I think that part is still will rely on the physical world, and the rest, I think, can happen virtually.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Jinay here, sir.
Hello, Jinay.
So first of all, thank you very much for accepting our invitation for Lit Talk. Sir, my question is on the self-motivation. Like you said, always run your own race. Don't compare with others. So, sir, how to motivate ourselves constantly when someone is passing through tough times? So
again, Jinay, I feel in this, the whole thing is about, can you lean on other people? Can you lean on your friends? Can you lean on your family? Sometimes I felt, there was this question, I think Praneeth was asking about, stress and how do you pass it down or you don't pass it down, right? That so many times when you're having a difficult situation in life, just talking about it actually makes it much simpler, right? Just talking to a friend and saying, I'm going through this, they may not be able to give any solution to it, but the fact that you got it off your chest and you put it out there makes it simpler. So I think when you're going through down phases, right? And all of us, go through down phases. The point is, can you reach out to people in that psychological safe space where you can say what's on your mind? And, like I said, it could be family, friends, it could be spouses, it could be whoever, right? That's all you can do, right? My own sense is, mental health, as you know, and emotional well-being has become a big thing globally, right? And I just think that there is this reluctance in corporate life to say that I'm not feeling good, I'm feeling pressured, I'm not, in the right frame of mind. And I think it is incumbent upon leaders, right, to create that environment of transparency, that environment of trust, right? Because I said some of these things, you can be vulnerable only if you feel that it's not going to be used against you, So if you come back and say, you know, I'm feeling very pressured and I can't take on this extra work, you should be able to say that without thinking that, oh my God, there goes the next promotion. They'll say Jinay can't actually, you know, take long hours and therefore we're going to use somebody else, right? That is the job of leaders to do, right? To be able to get, there are many of my team who actually not emotional well-being, but they'll come and tell me, not, well, they're not many, but there are people in my team who will come and say, I've got this job opportunity. What do you think? So I'm glad that that environment of trust has got created where that person can come and have that conversation with you rather than think, oh, you're not a loyal person and you decided to go out and now I'm not going to be actually focused on your career, right? That has to be, and that's why I feel don't join organizations only for money. All of you are so connected and so networked, right? Talk to your friends who are in other companies. Ask them, what is this company like? What does it really feel like? Unka, you know, KPMG ka CEO aake to he was saying all kinds of things to us, but how does it actually feel to work in KGS? You know, do you feel good or you don't feel good, right? I'm telling you all this on the strong belief that hopefully when you go and ask people in KGS, right, that they can tell you that this is what they experience. Otherwise, you know, what is the point of having the theoretical knowledge of what it should be? Theoretical knowledge is very easy. The actual, you know, my biggest fear is always that as you become a larger and larger company, we are 12,000 today, how do you keep the feeling of a small company alive? How do you make people feel that this is still a company which views me as Jinay Shah and doesn't view me as an FTE, right? And fine, it's some FTE. So that project had one FTE, that FTE is not there anymore. How do we feel that it's actually you as an individual? So I think the answer is that you have to seek out organizations which have cultures. You have to talk to your friends. You have to just don't try and deal with it yourself. Frankly, don't. Right. So, you know, low phases become better when you try and talk to friends and others.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir.
Hello, Anupam.
Hi, sir. So my question is, as we are seeing in an organization, the shareholders are the most important stakeholders, and which creates a bias towards them. Also, a manager acts in accordance with the objectives set by the leadership, which is usually profit-oriented. So my question to you is, what's your take on the role of leadership in order to set up a strong and in order to set up a strong investor and business relationship?
I think, see, Anupam, the point is that nowadays, in fact, mostly, you know, globally now, everybody is not viewing things only through the construct of one stakeholder, which is a shareholder, right? People are talking about communities, people are talking about shareholders, people are talking about employees, people are talking about communities, etc. So I think, again, the job of a leader is to be able to set out a balanced vision for what this organization needs to do, and then give equal importance to everything, right? Or at least give importance to everything. So if I say that diversity and inclusion is important to me because it's an integral part of the culture of this company, or citizenship and communities is an important part because, you know, it's the right thing to do. But I spend 95% of my time talking on profitability and the revenues and the top line and the bottom lines, people are going to basically disregard the others, right? Because there's a whole thing about, you know, that one thing I feel is that leaders are being watched all the time, right? All of you are going to be in leadership positions, whether you know it or not, people are watching you all the time. And people are less interested in what you're saying and far more interested in what you're doing. So to your question, I think the job of a leader in this is, can I set out a balanced vision saying all of these are important and they give equal importance to them rather than overemphasizing one element versus the other? I don't know, Anupam, whether that answers your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay. It's good, yeah. Sometimes, you know, it'll be interesting if somebody says, no, actually it doesn't answer my question at all. You've given me a totally wrong answer. But anyways, thank you.
So I have more of a personal question to ask, may I?
Please go ahead.
So as you said, that there's a front end of consulting and there's a business development. Now, I've got this challenging responsibility of being the principal consultant and business head for the NCR region for a mature startup after I graduate out from here. So the partner of the firm already told me that Delhi is going to be a very tough market. And it'll be a challenge because here the culture is that they would want to partner with the big companies like KPMG, Deloitte, etc. So it becomes very difficult for us to make business there. So, sir, now I have got this challenge. Would you give me any tips on that?
give you a response on how to sell the consulting more than KPMG. Is that the response? I can't. How can I do that? How can I be untrue? No, but the answer is that. See, ultimately speaking, right? Forget forget your, I won't give it the answer of big 4, big 6 versus, the consulting firm you're joining, right? In the end, right, when organizations become larger, they tend to end up becoming bureaucratic, right? And customers often value, flexibility, and customers often value, an ability to have an influence in how something is done, or what kind of say they can have in the outcome, right? So sometimes smaller organizations are far more agile and they're far more nimble in how they can respond and react to a situation rather than a larger company. And this is now, as I said, not in the context of consulting, I'm just giving a general answer, right? And then the ability for you to be able to articulate to a customer that what is the value you're bringing that a big organization can't bring, right? Because obviously the big organization can bring a lot of domain and people behind, a proposition, but is it a better price point? Is it a better technical solution? Is it more personalized attention? Is it access to the founders? What is it that will make it more compelling for somebody to use a smaller organization than a larger organization?
Right, sir.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Hi. We are done with the 1.5 hours. I have some more time. So if all of you don't have anything that you have to do or go to, etc., I'm happy to carry this on for the next few minutes. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for extending the time.
Okay.
Sir, I again had a little bit personalized question, personal question. I had this unorganized thought somewhere in my mind that I am aware that IT is very important and it is the future. But I see a lot of companies that come to hire are looking for people with an experience in IT. Then I started feeling that why didn't I study IT? And why instead of aviation, you're not being shortlisted, there is nothing, then sometimes I also feel that there is an IT bubble that is building up, meaning I don't have the numbers, but I see a lot of kids are studying IT, they are studying coding from school. And I also thought that I will ask my son to, or daughter, whatever it is, to go into an IT course or something. So, but if the same thing happens, what about if there is a shortage of manpower in fields like operations? What about the social skills, stakeholder management, communication, persuasion? What about these soft skills? Are they decreasing in their importance? So, isn't it also important? I just want to know your take on it.
No, so Akshay, I think soft skills are exceptionally important, right? And I think EQ is as important as IQ, right? And that is what sometimes is missing from the corporate world, right? The whole thing ends up becoming, I tell people that try and lead from your heart as much as you lead from your head, right? Because ultimately all of us are emotional people, right? We react to emotion more than we often react to other impulses, which is why when you go see a movie and there's a sad scene, you'll feel teary-eyed, or an ad is really good and you'll say, wow, this really resonated with me, right? We're human beings, we respond to emotion. But to your specific question, when I say technology, right, it's not as if, the fact is every business in the world for the most part is relying on technology to deliver efficiencies, right? And you may not be a technologist. So you may not be that computer engineer or an electronics engineer or a whatever engineering degree that you had to do, or the point is you need to be able to figure out how can I use technology to make this better, right? And as a business leader, like I said, I have no grounding in technology, right? I'm a chartered accountant. But the point is, I am very aware that technology can make things much simpler from an employee point of view, from a customer point of view, from how quicker things can get done, how when you do one project, you can create reusable code which can get used on another project, and so on and so forth, right? You have to be able to think that through, right? So, I don't know specifically, Akshay, what your background is, and, you said aviation, I think you said you were from,
yes,
right?
Sir.
So you're from aviation. So I think one is that it's important to have a great understanding of technology and the ability to use it to transform organizations and experiences, right? But soft skills are never going to go away. That's what they say when you read that, this whole debate about, will automation take away jobs, etc. And they say that human behaviors like empathy and creativity and curiosity will never go away, right? And the fact of the matter is, we all want to work for intelligent people who add to our thought process. Of course, we all want to do that, right? But you fundamentally want to work with a boss who is a nice person who has your interests at heart, who's humane, who you can reach out to, who you can talk to, who can talk about your anxieties, you can talk to them about your family life, you can take advice from them, etc., etc. Those are very human elements. So it's not, that's I said, I'd like to hope that people learn from me not just from an intellectual point of view. In fact, a lot of the team I have know far more about their domain than I do. I have no doubt about that. But hopefully I am able to give some perspective to them which is slightly different only because I've worked that much longer or I have slightly different experiences. But hopefully they feel that this is a leader who is invested in driving culture and who's invested in thinking about us as individuals. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I got a good insights from you, and I think it will help me in the future. Yeah.
Thank you. So should we do a couple of questions, Divya, and then do a wrap?
Yes, so sure. We have a class at 4, so we have some time.
Okay, great. But I'm sure you want to break rather than going through a class straight from here.
Sir, I have
one question.
Okay, Himanshu, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Rusvi. Thanks, sir, for taking out the time, first of all, and sharing so much insights. So one thing that you mentioned in the beginning, that in the short run, we do feel bad about some of the things that happen, but in the long run, it doesn't actually matter. So those hindsight biasness that we came across in our day-to-day working, that whether we should, how we should handle that thing, or now, and rather than hampering our emotions, mental state, how we can use it in a more fruitful way. What is the
I think, Himanshu, is a bit like, I guess it was a question I think Jinay asked or somebody, right? That at some point when things are not going how you feel they should, and you feel relatively you're not doing that well, and somebody else has, done better, etc. There is no other way out of it rather than, like I said, talk to people, vent it out, speak to them, articulate what your, things are. And believe me, folks, I've worked 30 years, so I have that. I'm not saying that 30-year makes me so much smarter than you, but it gives me more experience in life, right? Steve Jobs once said that you can connect the dots in life only when you look back, not when you're looking forward, right? So sometimes things are happening and you're wondering, why is it happening? I've been in, circumstances where, frankly, I've been in an organization and I'm a VP and somebody else is an SVP. And I think I've thought that, yeah, I'm much better than that SVP. So I don't understand why I'm a VP and that guy's an SVP, and the reverse should be happening. But the fact is, then when you get to this next level, that same day, you will forget all your angst, right? So it's a question of, they say in corporate life now, you need to have resilience and you need to have grit. So when things don't go the way you think they are, and that's where this, again, character can get determined far more during the bad times than it can during the good times, right? So can you lift yourself up, right? And say, never mind, there was a promotion opportunity, 2 people applied for it, I didn't get it. You may think that I was slightly better and the other guy wasn't, but whoever the interviewers didn't feel that, never mind, another opportunity will come through, right? So I just think you have to be able to say that, look, I'm going to work till I'm at least 60. And frankly, the way nowadays human lifespans are going, I'm not sure 60 is going to be the retirement age very soon. I think it'll get extended out, right? Because people are living so much longer and they have so much more, it's not as if they don't have thinking ability or doing ability. So therefore, if you think I'm going to work till 60, 65, 2 years, 3 years, it really will not make a difference to you once you've reached a certain stage in your life. And don't think in your mind you're thinking apne aap to CEO ban gaye aur hame bol rahe ho ki it doesn't make a difference, where you reach in life and all. That's not the thing, right? I genuinely, I feel this so strongly, right, that I keep telling my sons this, that, don't be in a hurry to get to the next point. You will get to where you have to get to in life.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I was just going to say my HR head and his wife are both from XLRI. So.
That is
anyway, sir. Yeah. Sorry. Last question somebody said.
Yes, sir. So, sir, we had studied a paper called Illusion of Understanding. Basically, the argument of the author is that many times we tend to ignore whenever there is a successful person or a successful organization, we only focus on what they did correctly, and we tend to ignore what did not go wrong. Basically, the part of luck that is played into the success. So, what's your take on that? How much does a luck plays the role in the success of?
I think, Prithviraj, I think it plays an absolute role in where you get to in life, right? In fact, there was a joke I read which said, of course, luck has a part to play in your success. Otherwise, how would you explain the success of people that you dislike a lot? So but the point in this is being in the right place at the right time is as important as actually having the capability and the competence, right? Fact of the matter is, all of you are, let's say you got through this exec MBA batch, and there'll be many who haven't got through. That doesn't make them less competent. There could be, many who, are as competent as you who didn't get through. The fact is, on that day in the morning, somebody had a fight with a friend or a family member or a spouse, or just had a bad day or got stuck in a traffic jam and couldn't do well in the entrance exam, right? Or you did well, right? That's why I feel competence is a given. You have to be competent to get ahead in life. You have to be hardworking. You have to be talented. All of that is a given. But being in the right place at the right time is very, very important. Okay. And I feel that people often don't want to attribute success to luck because, you almost feel it's taking away from your own achievements. Okay. But I'm very clear in my life that if you think of all of us, right, just an accident, everybody on this call, including me, an accident of birth and being born in the right family has actually enabled us to get a certain impetus which other people have not in this country, especially in this country, right? So I just feel that, to your specific question, there is absolutely an element of luck, and luck, in my view, is defined as being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right person, making the right contact, somebody just happening to meet you somewhere and say, oh, by the way, so and so is hiring. Are you actually looking at it? And you get the job, and somebody else doesn't get that job, right? So yeah, so don't ever disregard how important that can be in careers.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I think so. Divya, we reached the end, yeah.
Yes, sir. So with the address of today, we are very enlightened and enriched for our future goals, for our professional and personal life, and in whichever field we get the opportunity to work. And you yourself are an example. You've explained through various anecdotes and stories of your personal and professional life regarding various instances. And thank you, Batch, for engaging so fruitfully and making it a fruitful session. And thank you very much for, taking out your precious time out of your busy schedule to address us without any personal or professional gain. So I'm very thankful to the batch, and I'm very thankful to you. And I can say it with conviction that this is by far the most interactive session ever. So thank you very much, sir, for taking out time and addressing us.
I think thank you, Divya, for having me. This is one of the most engaging sessions I've been on. It's not easy to be on a, be on a call for like, whatever, an hour and 45 minutes and, still feel that you could go on. Thank you for the questions. Some of them, absolutely made me think, and, some really good probing questions that were being asked. Thank you. I think, and thank you for taking out the time and being on it for so long. And, whatever way your career takes you, I hope that you're all, very, very successful in whatever it is that you've, sought to do. Of the 17% women in this batch, the only message I have for you is, please don't stop on this journey that you're on, right? You reached a journey, whether that is a marriage, whether that decision point is a child, join an organization which is progressive and which values, working with you through your life events. You worked very hard to get you where you have to. Don't give up this path. So many women unfortunately drop out as they, life events, like I've said, happen because, they feel that, they need to focus their attention elsewhere. But, all of you do well. And thank you for making this, so engaging for me. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.